Before I begin, a disclaimer that today's episode will feature discussions involving Tibet. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'll be referring to Tibet and Tibetans as a separate entity as that of China and the Chinese, as historically they have been separate entities. As you may know, Tibet is administered as the Tibet Autonomous Region as part of the People's Republic of China. But events in Tibet's modern history have made the identity of Tibet a politically sensitive issue, hence the purpose of this disclaimer. The differentiation is important for the purposes of this episode, and I'm not trying to incite anything political out of this. The Bamboo History Podcast aims to be politically neutral, and we simply just want to deliver history content in an engaging and effective manner. Thank you all for understanding. Now, let's begin this episode. G'day everyone, I'm your host Stephen, and welcome to another episode of the Bamboo History Podcast. For those of you who are new, the Bamboo History Podcast is a podcast about Chinese and East Asian history. If this content is up your alley, please subscribe to my podcast, check out my website, and my socials, that's Instagram and TikTok. Today, we will be talking about a very important trade route that originated in ancient China. And no, it's not the Silk Road, it's another one. Today's episode will be about the famous Tea Horse Road, or the Cha Ma Dao. Also, one more disclaimer. If I'm pronouncing any Tibetan words incorrectly, please forgive me. It's not my native language, so thank you for understanding. In today's episode, I'm going to take all of you on a journey to one of China's most remote and fascinating places. 3 specific places, in fact: Sichuan, Yunnan, and Tibet. Tibet, also known as Xizang, is famous for being the roof of the world because it's the highest region on Earth in terms of altitude, with an average elevation of 4,380 meters. That's 14,000 feet. To give you some perspective, the highest peak in Australia is only around 2,300 meters, Mount Kosciuszko. Tibet is home to the world's harshest conditions, but also contains the world's most spectacular mountains. Biggest example being the Himalayas. Sichuan, spelt Sichuan, is a large province in southwest China that borders Tibet. And whilst it has recently achieved fame for some of its spicy cuisine, the region also has some of the world's most beautiful mountains and rivers. Yunnan, spelt Yunnan, lies south of Sichuan and southeast of Tibet, is one of the most southern regions in China, and borders Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. If there was one word that could describe Yunnan, it's the word diverse. It is diverse in landscapes, in culture, and in people. Why am I ranting on about these 3 areas? Well, that is because the famous Tea Horse Road, which is today's focus, traverses these 3 regions. The Tea Horse Road is also known as the Ancient Tea Horse Road, or the Cha Ma Gu Dao in Chinese. In Tibetan, it is known as Gyalum. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The Tea Horse Road originated as a trade route, and you would have guessed from the name that tea and horses were the primary items of trade on this route. Tea originated in China, and in places such as Sichuan and Yunnan, the climate made it easy for those areas to grow and cultivate tea leaves. Horses, on the other hand, you wouldn't initially think that such a harsh place like Tibet would have horses. But they do. In fact, there are about 6 different horse species that originated from Tibet. They have adapted to the harsh environment of Tibet and became integral to the lives of Tibetans, who have used them to herd livestock, to travel, and occasionally as pack animals. It wasn't just tea and horses though that were traded on the Tea Horse Road. Other items were traded too, such as wool, gold, silver, ivory, and ingredients for herbal medicine. The length of the Tea Horse Road was around 10,000 kilometers in total, and it connected Tibet with Sichuan and Yunnan. This trade route was not for the faint-hearted. It straddled breathtaking mountains, crossed raging rivers, snaked through wild forests, and rounded treacherous cliffs. Not unexpected for a trip to the rooftop of the world. Traditionally, there have been 2 routes that one could take as part of the Tea Horse route. The first route, the northern route, originated from Ya'an in Sichuan and crossed places like Kangding and Chamdo before reaching Lhasa in Tibet. The second route, the southern route, originated in Simao in southern Yunnan, which was a tea-producing region, before going north through Dali, Lijiang, Shangri-La, and then onto Lhasa in Tibet. Both these routes could then be further extended to places like Nepal, Myanmar, and India. The primary function of the Tea Horse Road was for Tibetans to get hold of tea and for the Chinese to get hold of horses, although, as I mentioned, other products were traded too. However, the Tea Horse Road was more than just a couple of trade routes to exchange tea and horses. It was also the primary method that allowed the ancient cultures in Tibet, Sichuan, and Yunnan to connect with each other. Archaeologists have found near the Tea Horse Road many schist tombs that date to as early as the Shang and Zhou periods of ancient China, which were more than 3,000 years ago. This suggests that migration and communication had already existed along this road during that time. The tea trade, however, began much later, during the 7th and 8th centuries CE. In this period, there were 2 major powers in the region. The Han Chinese ruled the Tang dynasty, and the Tibetans ruled the Tibetan Empire, known in Chinese as Tubo. According to the Tibetan history text Hanzang Shiji, or Historic Collection of the Han and Tibet, during the reign of Trudu Songtsen between the years 676 to 704 CE, it was recorded that the Tibetan aristocracy began to drink tea, used tea bowls, and also classified tea into different categories. Tea was already being consumed by the Han Chinese and the various ethnic groups that lived in southwest China at the time, and it was very likely that they had spread tea into Tibet. The spread would have been made easier during the period of the Tibetan Empire, where the Tibetans had conquered parts of northwest Yunnan and set up an administration base there. This would have allowed tea to be directly exposed to the Tibetans. The exchange of horses for tea, however, began during the Song dynasty between the 10th and 13th centuries CE. By now, tea had become a popular drink amongst Tibetans, and they desperately needed it from the Chinese. But what could they offer? In return, from their harsh, resource-scarce environment that the Chinese would like, so that they could get their tea. Well, you guessed it. Horses! The Chinese Song dynasty needed lots of horses. But why? You see, during the Song dynasty, it was surrounded by powerful empires to the north, namely the Liao, Xia, and later the Jin empires. These northern neighbours were strong because their army was mainly cavalry. This was owed to them being located on large swaths of grassland where large numbers of horses could be raised. The Song did not have this advantage, and having horses in your army at that time was probably equivalent to having tanks in 20th century warfare. So these northern empires would dominate the Song army, who were mainly foot soldiers, and they were a constant source of threat. Hence, the Song government needed horses for their armies, and aha! The Tibetans had these horses. And so from here, the exchange of horses and tea began on this tea horse road. In the year 1074 CE, the Song dynasty government established the Cha Ma Si, or in English the Tea and Horse Office, to organize the tea and horse trade, and markets were established in northwest China to facilitate this. It was recorded that during the first half of the Song dynasty, in the northern Song period, about 20,000 horses were being exchanged per year. Meanwhile, in Sichuan, annual output of tea was on average about 15 million kilograms or 15,000 tons, and half of that was being sold to Tibet. The tea horse trade reached its peak by the Ming dynasty a couple of hundred years later, where the Chinese would determine the type of tea given to the Tibetans based on the quality of horses that they were receiving. In 1735, during the Qing dynasty, the Chinese stopped buying horses from Tibet, but tea trade continued to flourish, aided by ease of trade restrictions. And even if they weren't taking horses from Tibet, they were still taking other items from them. Tea trade from Yunnan had also flourished, with the creation of a market there that led to an exponential growth of tea transported from Yunnan to Tibet. The Qing dynasty court also used tea as a means of pleasing the Tibetan elites. For example, the spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, would be allocated 2,500 kilograms of tea, and the second highest spiritual leader, the Panchen Lama, was allocated half of that. And when I say spiritual leaders, I mean spiritual leaders of Tibetan Buddhism. The tea horse road, however, would be especially important during World War II in the 20th century CE. During World War II, Japan invaded China and took over all the coastal areas of China and blockaded all the international highways. This was in order to blockade China from receiving any supplies from outside, by both water and on land. However, the tea horse road was deep in the interior of China, far from Japanese occupation and influence, and hence it became a very important supply route for China during the war. During this period of time, a man named Peter Goulart, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Goulart, that's spelt Goulart, lived in the city of Lijiang in Yunnan, a stop on the tea horse road. He wrote a book called Forgotten Kingdom, and in the book he describes in detail the activities on the tea horse road, including the items being traded. such as, quote, sewing machines, textiles, cases of the best cigarettes, both British and American, whiskies and gins of famous brands, dyes and chemicals, kerosene oil in tins, toilets and canned goods, end quote. Peter Gallart estimates that 8,000 mules and horses and 20,000 yaks were being used for trade during this time on the Tea Horse Road. Another source claims that 25,000 horses and mules were being used during this time. After the war ended, the Tea Horse Road lost its importance, mainly for the following reasons. The first one was modern transportations. With things such as trains and trucks, lugging things on pack mules and caravans wasn't going to be as convenient. This was aided by roads, and the second reason was obviously roads. Roads were built connecting Tibet to the rest of China. The best example being the Sichuan-Tibet Highway, which was completed in 1954. This would have rendered the Tea Horse Road obsolete. However, in recent times, there has been a resurgence of people using the Tea Horse Road. Not for tea and horses though, but for tourism. The Tea Horse Road is a great way for visitors to experience the cultural and natural diversity of Tibet, Sichuan and Yunnan. Many travel websites and blogs advertise it as a 7 to 8 day trek. It is also a sacred route for many different groups of people. For example, the yellow and red sects of Tibetan Buddhism, the Dongba religion of the Naxi people, Han Chinese Buddhism and Taoism, Hinayana of the Dai people, and the Benzhu worship of the Bai people. And many people of these religions would walk this route for their pilgrimages. So if you plan on going to China and you're not sure what to do, maybe consider visiting the Tea Horse Road, because in my opinion, it would be a trip that you would never forget. And myself, I've never been to the Tea Horse route either, so it's definitely something on my bucket list too. So yeah, that's it. That's the end of the episode of the famous Tea Horse Road, the Cha Ma Dao, or the Yalam. I hope this was an entertaining and educational episode. It goes to show that important roads like this not only connect people from a material point of view, but also from a cultural point of view as well. I want to especially give credit to Yang Fuquan's article, The Ancient Tea Horse and Caravan Road, the Silk Road of Southwest China, which was published in June 2004 in the Silk Road Journal. This article provided me with great detail on the history of this obscure but important trade route. Remember everyone, before you leave, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to tune into my other episodes and subscribe to my podcast. If you have any feedback, topic suggestions, or general comments, please DM me on my Instagram or email me. I'll leave all those details in the description box below. And yeah, don't forget to check out my Instagram and my socials as well, because for example, on my Instagram, I would put up pictures relating to this episode, just so you had a visual idea of what I'm talking about. Anyways, it's time to go now. Thank you everyone for tuning in to today's episode. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and I'll see you all next time on the Bamboo History Podcast. Bye for now.